You're home, finally. That sacred moment after a long day when you close the door and feel like the world has stayed outside. You take off your shoes, let your hair down, put on those comfortable clothes that no one else should ever see. You sigh. This is your sanctuary. And then the phone rings. It's a friend. They're in the area. Want to stop by just to say hi. Your heart races. Your stomach tightens. A silent discomfort begins to spread through your chest. You look around and see the dishes in the sink, the clothes on the couch, that pile of mail you promised to organize 3 weeks ago. And more than that, you feel something deeper, something you can't easily express. You simply don't want to. You don't want anyone entering your space right now. And that doesn't make you a bad person. In fact, it makes you something far more common than you imagine. Before we continue this journey together, if you identified with that feeling, leave your like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment what time you're watching this. Let's find out who the night owls are and who's enjoying their afternoon. Done? Let's dive deep into this question that few have the courage to admit out loud. There's a phrase that circulates on the internet, almost like a secret mantra for a specific group of people. Normal people like visitors. The phrase carries weight and implicit guilt. If you don't like having people over at your home, you're not normal. You're different. You're too reserved. But is that really true? Or are we looking at something much more complex, much more human than simply liking or not liking company? The truth is that home, for many people, isn't just a physical place. It's an extension of the mind itself. It's the only territory in the world where you don't need to wear a social mask, where you don't need to perform, where you can be absolutely authentic without fear of judgment. When someone enters that space, it's not just a casual visit. It's an interruption, even if well-intentioned, of your most intimate refuge. And resisting that isn't a sign of coldness. It's a sign that you deeply value your inner peace. Think about it with me. From the moment you wake up, you're in social mode. You greet the neighbor in the elevator. You smile at the coffee shop attendant. You answer messages, take calls, attend meetings. You're constantly modulating your voice, your expressions, your reactions to fit what's expected of you in each context. This isn't dishonesty. It's social survival. That's how society works. But it's exhausting. And home is the only place where this mechanism can be completely turned off. When you have guests over, even if they're people you love, you need to reactivate that mode. You need to be a host. You need to make sure the person is comfortable, has something to drink, that the conversation doesn't die in awkward silences. You need to hide that part of you that only exists at home, that messy, tired, vulnerable version. And this consumes energy that many people simply don't have to give after already having donated so much of themselves throughout the day. Now let's explore something even deeper. For some people, the aversion to having guests over has nothing to do with the guests themselves. It has to do with the home. More specifically, with what the home reveals about who you are. Your home is an open diary. The books on your shelf, the pictures on the wall, the state of your kitchen, even the smell of the environment, all of this tells a story about you. And not everyone is ready for that story to be read. We live in an era of obsessive image curation. On social media, you choose exactly which angle to show, which filter to use, which moment to share. You have total control over the narrative. But at home, that control disappears. Your home is you without editing. And that can be uncomfortable. Because what if people see the mess and judge? What if they see you still haven't bought decent furniture? What if they notice you have photos from a time you'd rather forget? What if they realize you're not as organized, as sophisticated, as successful as the image you project out there? This forced vulnerability is one of the most powerful reasons why some people avoid having guests over. It's not about disliking people. It's about being afraid of what people will think when they see who you really are when no one is watching. And here's something society rarely acknowledges. There's enormous pressure, especially in certain cultures, for your home to always be ready to receive guests. Always clean, always tidy, always with food in the fridge in case someone shows up. This expectation is, for many, another form of invisible labor. It's one more task on the endless list of things you need to do to be considered a functional adult, an adequate person. For women especially, this pressure is amplified. There's still a cultural expectation that women are the guardians of the home, the person responsible for keeping everything impeccable and welcoming. Even when she works the same hours as anyone else, even when she's exhausted, there's this silent demand that her home should be ready to receive guests at any moment. And saying I don't want to have guests over can be read as I'm not a good host, which by extension might seem like I'm not a good person. But let's challenge that narrative for a moment. Why has the ability to host well at home become a character marker? Why is someone who prefers to meet friends at a cafe, in a park, anywhere but within the four walls of their personal sanctuary, seen as less warm, less generous, less human? The answer is rooted in ancient traditions. For millennia, hospitality was a fundamental pillar of human societies. Offering shelter and food was a matter of collective survival, a moral code that ensured travelers wouldn't die on the road, that strangers could find safety. In many cultures, refusing hospitality was considered a grave offense, almost a sin. And although we live in a completely different world now, where hotels exist on every corner and no one needs to depend on the kindness of strangers to survive, these values still echo in our social expectations. But here's the thing. Just because something is traditional doesn't mean it's appropriate for everyone. The evolution of society should also include the evolution of what we consider acceptable behaviors. And recognizing that some people simply function better, are happier, mentally healthier when they have total control over their personal space, shouldn't be seen as a character flaw. It should be seen as self-knowledge. Let's talk about introverts. There's a huge misconception about what it means to be introverted. Many people think introversion is synonymous with shyness, with not liking people. But that's not it. Introversion, in the psychological sense, has to do with where you get your energy. Extroverts get energized by social interaction. The more people around, the more alive they feel. Introverts, on the other hand, spend energy in social interactions. They may love people, may be extremely sociable, but at the end of the day, they need solitude to recharge. For an introvert, having guests at home is particularly draining. Because it's not just the social effort. It's the fact that this effort is happening in the only place where they should be able to escape social effort. It's as if someone occupied your recharging station and asked you to keep functioning without pause. And afterwards, when the guest finally leaves, the introvert doesn't just feel relief. They feel profound exhaustion. They need hours, sometimes days, to fully recover. And this isn't an exaggeration. Studies in neuroscience show that introverted brains process information differently. They're more sensitive to external stimuli, more prone to becoming overwhelmed with too much sensory information at once. A house full of conversations, laughter, movement can be literally overwhelming for an introvert's nervous system. So when they say they don't want to have guests over, it's not a whim. It's a legitimate biological necessity. But what about people who aren't necessarily introverted but still prefer not to have guests over? What's happening with them? Often, the answer lies in past experiences. Maybe you grew up in a house where guests meant a lot of stress, where your parents got very worried preparing everything, where you were instructed to behave in a specific way, where you didn't have as much freedom to be yourself. Maybe you have memories of feeling uncomfortable in front of guests, of having your space shared without you being prepared. These experiences create patterns. Your brain learns that guests equal stress. And even now, as an adult, in control of your own home, that pattern remains. You know, rationally, that you can control things now. But the emotional response, the tightness in your chest, the anxiety that comes from a place deeper than logic can easily reach. And then there's another layer, the mental health layer. Depression and anxiety don't manifest only as sadness or worry. They also manifest as heightened sensitivity to judgment, as a greater need for control over the environment, as difficulty dealing with the unexpected. For someone facing these conditions, the idea of having guests over can be quite challenging. Because when you're going through a difficult time emotionally, your home can reflect that. The curtains may stay closed. The dishes may pile up. You may not have the energy to keep everything in order. And the last thing you want is for someone to see you in that moment. Not because you're vain, but because you may already be being hard on yourself. Dealing with the presence and perception of another person can seem very difficult. Anxiety works differently, but can also be quite challenging. People with anxiety tend to imagine many possible scenarios. A simple visit transforms into multiple worries. What if the person doesn't like the food you offered? What if they get uncomfortable? What if you run out of things to talk about? What if? Anxiety can transform the act of having someone over at home into a significant source of worry. Now, here's something important that needs to be said. Not liking to have guests over doesn't mean you don't like people. You can deeply love your friends and family and still prefer to meet them outside your home. You can be generous, kind, present in people's lives and still keep your home as a sacred space just for you. These things aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, many people who avoid having guests over are incredibly social in other contexts. They love going out to dinner, traveling with friends, attending events. The difference is that in those scenarios, they have more flexibility. If they get tired, they can leave. If the interaction gets uncomfortable, they can withdraw. But when the guest is at your house, you have less control over when the interaction ends. You need to wait until the person decides to leave. And this difference in control of the situation, for some people, is significant. There's also a practical aspect that can't be ignored. Having guests over costs money. You feel obligated to offer food, drinks, maybe even prepare something special. For someone living on a tight budget, this isn't just stressful. It's a real financial concern. But you can't easily say that. You can't say, "Oh, I don't want you to come over because my budget is tight." So you make excuses, dodge, and feel guilty about something that's actually a totally legitimate concern. And then there's time. Having guests over isn't just the time the person spends at your house. It's the time before, cleaning, organizing, buying things. It's the time during being a host instead of doing the 1,000 other things you need to do. And it's the time after, cleaning again, recovering your energy, returning to your normal state. For someone who's already overloaded with work, family responsibilities, commitments, adding all of this simply isn't viable. But here's something interesting. The more you avoid having guests over, the harder it can get. Because the ability to be a host is like a muscle. If you don't exercise it, it can lose conditioning. The first few times you have someone over after a long time can be genuinely uncomfortable, not because you're bad at it, but because you're out of practice. And this discomfort can reinforce the idea that you're not good with guests, which can make you avoid it even more, creating a pattern that repeats itself. So what to do? How do you navigate a society that expects you to open your home with a smile when you feel a deep need to maintain your personal boundaries? The first thing, and perhaps the most important, is to stop judging yourself. Recognize that your preferences are valid. You don't need to be like everyone else. You don't need to force behaviors that go against your nature just to fit into a social ideal that, honestly, not even most people achieve. If you prefer to meet people outside your home, do that. Be proactive in suggesting neutral places for meetings. Make this your characteristic. You can be known as the person who always knows the best cafes, the most beautiful parks, the hidden restaurants. That's no less valuable than being known as the person who always hosts well at home. And if you absolutely must have someone over, establish clear boundaries. Say how much advance notice you need. Make clear how long the person can stay. Don't be afraid to be honest about your limitations. You can say, "Look, I'd love to have you over, but I need a few days to prepare myself mentally and tidy things up." Most people will understand. And those who don't, well, maybe they're not the people who should be in your most intimate space anyway. Another strategy is to redefine what it means to host well. You don't need to serve a banquet. You don't need to have a house straight out of a magazine. Sometimes, hosting well is simply opening the door, offering a glass of water, and being authentic. If you have a true friend, they won't care about the dishes in the sink. They'll care about the conversation, about the connection. And if you can release that pressure of perfection, maybe having guests over will become more comfortable for you. But it's also important to recognize when your preference for not having guests over is being influenced by something deeper that may need attention. If you notice you're isolating yourself completely, that the idea of any social interaction causes you great discomfort, that you're refusing even opportunities for meaningful connection because of this, it might be time to seek professional help. A therapist can help you better understand what is healthy personal preference and what might be related to social anxiety or past experiences. They can give you tools to manage discomfort in constructive ways. Because the truth is that humans need connection. Not necessarily in the form of having guests at home, but in some form. And if your preference is limiting important connections for you, that's something that might be worth exploring with professional support. It's also worth remembering that your needs can change over time. Maybe now, in this phase of your life, you need a lot of personal space. But in a few years, maybe you'll discover you're ready to open your home in new ways. Or maybe not. And both are perfectly fine. The important thing is that you're making choices that honor who you are now, not who you think you should be. At the end of the day, the question of whether or not to have guests at home is much less about hospitality and much more about self-preservation. It's about recognizing that you have the right to a place in the world where the rules are yours, where you owe nothing to anyone, where you can exist without the constant pressure of being observed, evaluated, judged. And protecting that space isn't selfishness. It's wisdom. Because you can't serve from an empty cup. You can't be a good presence in people's lives if you never have time to recharge, to process, to simply be. And if keeping your home as a private sanctuary is what allows you to be functional, kind, and present in the rest of your life, then that's exactly what you should do. So next time you feel that tightness in your chest when someone mentions wanting to visit you, take a deep breath. Remember that it's okay. You're being true to yourself. You're not different in a negative way. You're just someone who deeply understands the value of personal space in a world that constantly asks you to give of yourself. And that, actually, is a type of self-awareness that deserves to be respected. Maybe the real question isn't why some people prefer not to have guests over. Maybe the real question is why we're still judging people for protecting their peace in ways that work for them. Because in the end, each of us is trying to live in this world in the best way we can. And if for you that means keeping your home as an inviolable refuge, then so be it. You have that right. You always have. May the Lord God grant us wisdom to respect our own boundaries and the boundaries of others, understanding that each human being was created unique, with different needs and different ways of seeking peace. May we find balance between connection and preservation of our own essence, always with love and without judgment.